Right, during this term, the main area of focus is Assessment Objective 2, which is experimenting, developing ideas, the use of different materials. So whilst we're on lockdown, I want you to think about different materials that you might have around the house. So while you might have access to traditional materials like acrylics and watercolours, pencil crayons, biro, oil pastels, chalk pastels, all the rest of those kind of things, which is fantastic if you have those, and we will look at using those, and I'd encourage you to do so if you have them. What I'd like to encourage you to do is to think about how you can use maybe a few different or unique materials for drawing and painting that everybody should have around the house or something similar. And as it's all about experimentation, it's exactly that. We want you to experiment, to try things out, to see what works, what doesn't work. And if it doesn't work, we don't want you to throw things away, but to photograph it, record it, write about it, say what worked and what didn't work. So for this first video, you'll see I've got a range of materials. I've got my phone here, so I've got access to some reference material. You might have a print off of a photograph that you're working from. So for Zoomorphism, you should have a collection of images of animals and people by now. But you might have some on your phone. And if you really need to, particularly with animals, you may have to use the internet to locate some other pictures if the pictures you've got aren't as good as what they could be, or you've used them quite a lot already. So that's up to you to kind of work out. So onto the materials. I've got some shoe polish here, which might seem a bit strange. We're going to have a go at maybe using a bit of shoe polish. I've also got some lipstick, which I've stolen off my daughter. So again, ask for permission if you're using any items. So this is an old lipstick that she doesn't use very often now. So again, you know, somebody in the house might have some makeup, or you might have shoe polish if you don't have makeup. Have a look at that. So I've also got a makeup brush. I'm using more of a this kind of stubby one here, just because I think that might be easier for drawing with. A earbud, so a cotton bud. Some of you might have those around the house. That could work, and even something like a spoon might work. So we're just gonna have a little play, really. Another option would be a cloth, again for applying kind of the polish or the lipstick for smudging purposes. And of course, you've got your good old fingers to kind of smudge with, and a pencil would be useful as well for when you're drawing, and all of you should have access to a pencil. So before we move on to the actual drawing, we're just any kind of paper that you've got. Most of you should have maybe printer paper, which is not ideal, but again, because of the circumstances we're in, any paper that you have, even if it's a bit crumpled or anything like that, could be useful for what we're doing, particularly as we're experimenting at the moment. I'm going to use this oversized paper just for the purposes of this video. So we're going to try a few of these things out and just see kind of what works. So let's just first of all make a few marks with the lipstick. So you can see you can get quite a dark mark there. And if we just put it down lightly, you can also smudge that in quite well to get some different tones. We could try using the bud again to kind of smudge that in and see how that works. Similar to using the finger really, but it might be good for finer details. And of course you can kind of go back over the top of that to maybe get some darker marks, but you will be limited by the amount of tones you could get from that. Let's have a go at the shoe polish and see how that comes out. So again, with the brush, you can see it goes on reasonably well. You get quite a light tone for that. Could also use our fingers again for that, and kind of move things around and see how you get on. Let's have a go with the end of a spoon. So you can see you can get quite a lot on there with that. So let's just see if we can make some marks. So you can kind of spread it a little bit like kind of, I suppose, butter on a knife, kind of spreading that out. So you can get some darker marks with that. Let's just put, you can also get, if you put a larger amount, you can get a darker shade with your finger. That will smudge though, so just be careful if you're doing that. In fact, both of these are quite similar in consistency, lipstick and shoe polish, which is why I've put these together. And again, you could try using an old rag or something like that, which could be anything, even an old sock, any material you've got, and also that could be used for making kind of marks on your paper. So let's just move some of these out the way, and I'll just do a quick kind of close-up of that, just so you can see the range of marks that you can get. It's quite a good idea to keep some of these marks on your page. So it might be worth trying them at the corner or at the top or side of a page, and just keep that as a record of your experimentation. Everything gets you marks when it comes to Objective 2. Any little testers can help, and you can write about these, say what materials you've used, what tools you've used, and all of that is a way, again, of picking up marks. So on the other side here, I've started to draw out a face, a self-portrait, in this case from the reference material. So I'm just going to find my image here that I'm using, just to get an idea of the lights and the shadows. So as you can see, I've already started to use the lipstick here to kind of draw out. You might want to use a pencil first, and I would say to you, keep the pencil really light so you can't see all the pencil marks underneath, although it doesn't matter too much. So we're now just going to start to put down quite lightly, actually, because it smudges quite well, and you see it still is quite a mark there. So it's not an easy thing to get rid of if you put a mark in the wrong place. And I'm using my finger to push the material in the direction that I want it. So I'm just looking at on kind of the face here where the light and the shadows are, and just kind of building that up, really smudging that in here. Now, as I said, we're kind of limited by the amount of tone that we can add. So I'm using the white of the page as well to add some tone in here. If I was using something like a pencil, I'd probably get a much finer range of tones than what we can get here. But you can see, even just with a small amount, these kind of few marks that we've put on here, you can still get a reasonable piece of work. So I'm just going to again continue to build this up. Now it might be you've got some different shades of lipstick, so it could be an idea to kind of use more than one shade on top of one another. So in fact, what I might do, which I haven't tried yet, is to use the shoe polish on top. Let's see if this works. So I'm going to use the brush in this case. This might be quite good for building up some darker tones. Let's just give that a go. I can maybe smudge that in a bit more with my fingers, which just adds a, you know, some different, again, tonal areas to the piece. So that works quite well. And again, the more I put on with this, the darker it will get. It won't go really dark, but particularly around the eyes for kind of things like eyelashes, the inside of the iris. Thinking about the light hitting the pupil. And again, if you layer up the shoe polish in this case, or the lipstick, it should give you a slightly darker tone. So I'm going over the top of some areas as well, just to make those a little bit darker. And it doesn't matter if your marks are quite loose and scratchy. I think all of that adds to it. So again, particularly where these kind of shadows are, where the stubble on my face is. Kind of just adding some texture there to the piece, which actually, those marks are quite nice. So in this case, actually using the two tones is working in my favour, because it's just adding a little bit more detail and definition to the face, creating a bit more form, and that's going to obviously create interest and hopefully get us higher marks as well, because we're not just using one material in this case, we're using more than one material, because I'm adding different marks, I'm adding different tones. All of that is going to help pick up some of those higher marks at GCSE. So I'm finding this brush is working quite well in this case, because it's just helping me to apply that, but I think it's still a good idea to go back to your finger, maybe even go back to, in this case, the lipstick. So I'm just going to put that on the top there, smudge that in. Might even start to add in the hair. And think about the marks. So you can see for the hair here, I'm using these kind of big strokes just to add some texture to that area. So I don't want to smudge that in completely, because I want it to look different to the other parts of the face, which are kind of blended a little bit more. And the key thing is this, you don't have to be really precise, because we're trying to be a bit more experimental. It doesn't matter if the mistakes are there, and I'd really encourage you to not worry too much about the mistakes. And this is why a lot of students struggle with this objective, because they're great when it comes to doing the refined work, but then when it comes to just actually trying things out, some students find that quite difficult. So I'm just going to kind of draw that ear in, bring that down here. Notice when you're shading, a really small amount goes a long way with these kind of materials, because they smudge in. It's a bit like when you're using oil pastels. You don't need to add a lot. A few little lines, smudge it in, makes all the difference. Let's just add in the neck there. Just having a bit of a line, smudge that in. And if I go back to using some of this darker kind of shade in places, just to build up the tones. So again, by going back over some of the areas that I've already added these materials to, are going to achieve a darker tone in places. So I actually don't want to do too much more to this, because I think already we're getting the impression that I want from this material. We've got this kind of smudgy affair, we've got different kind of textures on there. In fact, let me just add a little bit down here. Smudge that in. So if we just kind of remove these materials for a moment, and I can kind of just hold that up just so you can see it. So you can see the lightness isn't spot on, and that doesn't matter too much. And again, that's why I want to encourage you not to get bogged down with, is it an exact likeness, does it really look like the person? But what you can see is a range of tones. We can see light, we can see shadow, we can see different marks from where I've smudged it, where I've used different materials. And actually the two-tone works well in this case, but you might not have access to two tones. So even just using the lipstick or the shoe polish or whatever you have at hand could work. You could possibly even use a makeup palette. So something like blusher Might even work to get some of those kind of skin tones built up, so that could be something you could have a go at as well. So have a go and see what you can do.